Hey everyone, welcome to Richard's Retro. This is the Bible in 2022. Big announcement this week is that we're not meeting in person. So hopefully I've reached out to most of you that show up in person already, but if you're watching this video and planning on showing up at my house, I won't be there. So please check the link in the description below for our Google Meet channel. You can hop in that again at 7:30. We'll chat a little bit about our weeks and then kick off our discussion about the reading at 8 o'clock. All right. I hope to see you guys all there virtually. This week we read through Ruth, who we see stay faithful to Naomi after losing her Ruth's husband, Naomi's son. She decides to stick with Naomi and follow her God, being the Lord. She gleans, so picks up the extra leftover food in Boaz's field and finds out that Boaz is her guardian redeemer. So he takes great care of her and keeps her safe there. And then Naomi instructs her to go, ask for Boaz to redeem them. And he is prepared to do so, but make sure that the person who's first in line doesn't want to, and is actually very smart about making sure they understand the full weight of that decision, and so convinces them to let him redeem them. So he redeems them, marries Ruth, who then has Obed, who's the father of Jesse, the father of David. So we're seeing a little bit about David's great-grandparents and getting close to Israel's kings. But we just see a story of both Ruth's faithfulness and then Boaz being smart and a godly man and ready to do what's right and redeem them and lead to the family of David. Again, notably in Jesus' line, and not an Israelite, right? So even though God has called the Israelite people, he's constantly using prostitutes and foreigners, and with like Tamar, we see where she tricks her, I guess, father-in-law into having a kid, and so it's all these things where you think it would stain the line, and God just throws them in there. He's like, listen, I want real people. We then read Samuel, who's the last judge. Eli and Samuel are the last judges. So we see Samuel being born, consecrated to God, because Hannah couldn't have any kids, and so God gives her Samuel, and she gives Samuel back to God. He grows up. I love this actually in 1 Samuel 1:13. 1 Samuel 1:13. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard, and Eli thought she was drunk. So we also were going to read Acts this week, or we did read Acts this week. And we see them also praying so hard that people thought they were drunk. So I thought that was cool. I wonder what that looks like. I guess growing up around it, prayer just looks like prayer to me, but I wonder if to other people we look drunk. We learn about Eli's wicked sons, which is a shame because we also find out that, when Samuel gets old, his son's also not great. But Eli doesn't do anything about it. And so God promises that his sons are going to die. And he says this to his sons. He says, if one person sins against another, God may mediate for the offender. But if anyone sins against the Lord, who will intercede for them? And it's just an interesting thought. We sin all the time, but, he's putting different weight on sinning against people versus sinning against God. And his sons were sinning against God. We see God call Samuel, and it says, in those days, this is chapter 3, in those days the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. And that just seems so sad, right? Again, we get thousands of years just dumped into this book, and we are getting to see just the highlights where God touches a person or a time period. And so it's easy to think like, oh, back then God was always around and always doing stuff. But there's very little that comparatively that we're seeing. And so it felt like, and it's written here, that God's encounters were rare. And it can feel like that at times for us too. But it's important to remember He's always there, even when we can't feel Him, even when you can't see Him. He is working things out for His will. But He does call out audibly to Samuel, who thinks Eli is calling him, until after quite a while, eventually he realizes it's God, or Eli tells him it's God, and God just confirms that He's going to, depose Eli's family and raise up others. Then that comes to pass. They go to war with the Philistines. They take the ark to battle despite not being told to, and Eli's sons die, and then Eli dies at the news. But after stealing the Ark of the Covenant, the Philistines are afflicted with tumors and rats, so they return it, they do so by like putting it on a cart with cows and like keeping their calves, hoping the cows would like bring it back, but the cows just like straight on bring it back to Israel. They sacrifice the cows and then leave the ark at Kiriath Jearim for 20 years. And I don't know where it's supposed to be at this point. I don't know if it actually has a set place, but it just seems sad that they just kind of like left it there and forgot about it. Or that's what it reads like. Maybe they didn't forget about it. And then finally, in the last part of what we read in Samuel attacks and subdues the Philistines, and his sons turn away, and the people ask for a king, and God says, don't worry about them. They're not rejecting you. It says in chapter 8, verse starts in 7, they have rejected me. This is God talking. They've rejected me as their king. They have done as they have done from the day I brought them out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So God lets them get a king, and we'll read about Saul next week. But God has been trying to be their king through the judges and through prophets for generations, and they won't have it. And I mean, it's easy to see, right? I mean, why they struggle with it when even Samuel's sons turned away. He was too busy, I guess, judging to raise his kids. Okay, in we read Psalm 23 this week. I'm actually going to read all of it since it's short and I love it. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We'll talk about that for sure this week, but it's all good. It's all good. We read 37. I liked chapter 37, verse 21. The wicked borrow and do not repay, but the righteous give generously. And I just love this, that lack of sin and thus righteousness is constantly compared to generosity and compassion. And it's cool to me that those are such opposites, that if you can just force yourself or teach yourself to be generous and compassionate, that you are inherently pushing yourself towards righteousness. And that was all they had when Psalms was written, or when the Psalms were written. Now we get righteousness through Christ, but then that righteousness should be bleeding through with compassion and generosity. So if you're not seeing those fruits, pray about it. Okay, and then we read Psalm 120, and I liked verse 7. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. And I thought this was interesting, especially, we are reading a time period where God is calling the Israelites to be at war with the Philistines and the Canaanites. And so it's interesting to see that God does want peace, and there are just times when war is necessary. All right. And then we read Acts. We see Peter heal a beggar. And he calls out something we talked about last week about Jesus, saying heaven must receive him until the time comes for God to restore everything, as he promised long ago through his holy prophets. And I thought this was interesting, right? I mean, we keep thinking like, well, if only this had happened or this has happened, Jesus wouldn't have had to die, but he did, right? I mean, it was how God planned to restore everything. And it's interesting to me that he's, promised this long ago, and he's waiting until the time comes. And so it's crazy, like this God that's outside of time is orchestrating time, and he has appointed a time to restore everything, and it is intentionally not restoring it yet. It's part of his plan, and that hopefully that's comforting to you, that things not being restored yet is part of his plan, because it will make it better when it is restored. We see Peter brought before the Sanhedrin, and he just keeps talking about names, right? I mean, here specifically the name of Christ, but it says salvation is found in no one else, for there's no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. And I love that, right? Of all the names of God, right, Jesus is the best one. And importantly here, the only one given to us that we can be saved by. So despite all the other names that we're going to get through the Old Testament, this is the one that we can be saved by. And then I love this prayer. Now, Lord, consider their threats and enable your servants to speak your word with great boldness. These are the apostles praying for boldness. Stretch out your hand to heal and perform signs and wonders through the name of your holy servant. So they are praying, the believers are praying that God would stretch out his hand and heal. And after they prayed, the place where they were meeting was shaken. They were all filled with the Holy Spirit, and they spoke the word of God boldly. So that was a quick turnaround and answering of prayers there. We read that people were sharing everything, selling their land and giving it all to each other. And then we read about Ananias and Sapphira, who sold their field for some money, and then didn't want to give all of it. And they could have just not given all of it, but they gave part of it and said they gave all of it, which is weird that they lied and wanted to be part of this. But then what was strange to me is when Ananias heard this, he fell down and died. And it's just like, it seems harsh, like a harsh punishment for lying would be death of Ananias and Sapphira, who lied and followed him. And I thought that was crazy. I mean, apparently that's what was owed, but yeah, I'm curious. We should talk about that this week. Is why do you think Ananias deserved or got death? We see the apostles persecuted, and then fortunately, Gamaliel, one of the Pharisees, intelligently says when they're trying to stop them, let them go. Right? If it's God, you will not be able to stop these men. You will only find yourself fighting against God. So he's saying, if it's from the men, it'll fizzle out. Otherwise, you're fighting God, and that's a mistake. So we shouldn't do that. We see the choosing of the 7 to help take care of the widows and the Hellenistic Jews. Excuse me. And of those 7, we get to meet Stephen for the first time. And he's then seized and accused of blaspheming. And they take him to the Sanhedrin, and it says, all those who were sitting in the Sanhedrin looked
intently at Stephen, and they saw that his face was like the face of an angel. Again, why not stop there, right? You're judging this guy, you're accusing him of something, and you look at him and you're like, that guy looks kind of like an angel. You know, we should hear his testimony and then probably stone him. Rather than, oh, this guy's glowing. Maybe we should trust him and let him be. He gives a great speech detailing God's work for all of Israel, from Abraham through the prophets. And my dad has, and I've talked about this a few times, but he got a few facts wrong, slightly off, and I found some more this time reading through it. I thought this was interesting. Acts 7:22. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. We know that Moses wasn't powerful in speech, right? In fact, he tried to use that to get out of doing what God asked him to. And then we also see, and I don't know, I need to go check this one, but it says, this is the same Moses they rejected with the words, who made you ruler and judge? He was sent to be their ruler and deliverer by God himself through the angel who appeared to him in the bush. And I thought it was God that appeared to him in the burning bush, not an angel. Maybe I read it wrong, or maybe Stephen confused that as well. But they end up stoning Stephen, and we're introduced to Saul, who we'll read about next week. All right, short and sweet this week. Hopefully you enjoyed the reading. Again, we will not be meeting in person, so I hope to see you all virtually, and we'll meet again in person the following week. Cheers.